For decades now, there have been Christians advocating for the idea that Christians should not be involved in politics. But is this a biblical idea or just a man-made tradition? Firstly, we need to understand what politics is. Politics is government, and government is responsible for making the laws and policies that govern our society. So the real question we're asking is whether or not Christians should care about the laws and policies that govern our society and impact the lives of everyone in this nation. Or to put it another way, should Christians care about the well-being of the people around them? In this short video, I want to briefly explore two things. Are there any examples in the Bible of believers getting involved in politics? And are there any examples of practical ways in which policies have a very real impact on the well-being of those around us? In regard to biblical examples of believers being involved in politics, we have the prophet Samuel, who anointed both King Saul and King David. He did so under the guidance of God and with some input from the people, but he was the one that physically anointed them to their roles. This is very similar to the role the Governor General has in Australia today. Many of the well-known stories about Elijah involve confrontations he had with King Ahab. Elijah regularly rebuked King Ahab about the sinful ways he led the nation of Israel. Many of the prominent figures in the Old Testament held political office, such as Moses and Samuel, who were judges, which is very similar to being a king or president, and David and Hezekiah, who were kings. For those who think that was different because of the nation of Israel, we must remember Daniel and his three friends who were politicians in Babylon, a pagan and Gentile nation. The first half of the book of Daniel is all about the political actions of Daniel and his three friends. For those who think that was just the Old Testament, we must not forget that John the Baptist was in prison for publicly confronting King Herod over his sinful lifestyle, and Jesus himself was very political. Think of the Sabbath controversy. That was Jesus openly defying the Sanhedrin and breaking their laws. It was not God's laws that Jesus was breaking. He kept God's expectation for the Sabbath. It was man's laws. Laws made by the Sanhedrin, which was not just a religious body, but also a political body that had been given the power to make and enforce laws by their Roman overlords. Now let me give you some examples of how politics affects the lives of real people. At the basic level, you just have to think about the health department, education department, the justice system, main roads, building regulations, telecommunications, electricity, and transportation. All these issues are controlled by government. One important example of where politics affects the lives of real people is regarding abortion. There are around 90,000 abortions in Australia every year. Some people argue that all making it illegal will do is make it more dangerous, but you don't have to think about this argument for long in order to see the fallacy in it. If you consider the medical staff who perform abortions, many of them do so under duress. They don't want to do it, but they're made to feel like they have to. If it was illegal, this would not be the case. There are many others who are happy to do it, but if it were illegal, would not do so because they do not want to risk losing their medical license or facing prosecution. Likewise, many of the women having an abortion do so because they've been pressured into doing so by someone else. If it were illegal, this would be far less common. And many of the women who choose to have an abortion would make a different choice if there's a threat of prosecution. So in this case, by changing the law, which involves getting involved in politics, we could save tens of thousands of lives. Another example where politics affects the lives of real people is in relation to prostitution. Recently in Queensland, laws were passed to fully decriminalise prostitution. Countries that decriminalise prostitution soon find that doing so results in an increase of sex slaves being brought into that country. One alternative to this is the Nordic model prostitution legislation that decriminalises those who are prostituted and provides exit pathways for them, while making the buying and selling of sex a criminal offence. This has proven to drastically reduce prostitution and sex trafficking. So in this case, getting involved in politics helps women to regain dignity and freedom while protecting others who are at risk of being enslaved. At this point, some will object that all of this is only helping people in the here and now, and not for eternity. Which is true, and I strongly agree that one's eternal destiny and well-being is of much greater significance than anything we can do to help someone in their life here on earth. But in most cases, we do not need to choose between the two. We can work to help people in the here and now, and also be working to help people know Jesus so that they can spend eternity with him. Besides, the Bible encourages us to help people in the here and now. There are many passages of scripture, such as James 1:27, that encourage us to look after the orphan and the widow, as well as Jeremiah 29:7, where God commands the Jewish exiles in Babylon to seek the welfare of the city of Babylon, the pagan Gentile city in which they are now living. Likewise, we should seek the welfare of Australia and our local communities, and should work to look after the more vulnerable in our society. Another passage that many people are familiar with is 1 Timothy 2, which encourages us to pray for our political leaders. We're told at least one reason for doing this, and that is so that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life godly and dignified in every way. In other words, we should be praying for freedom to practice our faith. This passage also goes on to say that God desires all men to be saved. The point is that we should pray for religious freedom because that will enable more people to be saved. This shows the connection between getting involved in politics and sharing the gospel. Seeking the welfare of our nation and praying for religious freedom will give us great opportunity to shine the light of Jesus and to share the gospel. Authorised by Daniel Gill, 23 William Street, Rama.